Hi, everybody, and welcome to Big Joe's Journal. My name is Joe Tilden. I'm the host of this program. Well, here at the end of July 2020, we are honoring one of the last great civil rights leaders of our time, Congressman John Lewis from the state of Georgia. Congressman Lewis has served 34 years representing his district in the U.S. House of Representatives. And of course, it's a rather elongated funeral. The other day, they reenacted the march across the bridge in Selma, Alabama, that he participated in with Martin Luther King Jr. And of course, as a result of that march, he got whacked by a billy club and got a fractured skull out of it. Yesterday, he made the trip across in a horse-drawn wagon. Far, far different from the trip he made a number of years ago. Well, John Lewis is, of course, one of the last of the great civil rights leaders. I think the greatest one that doesn't get enough credit, and that was Thurgood Marshall. Thurgood Marshall was an attorney. He argued the Brown versus the Board of Education case before the U.S. Supreme Court. And he won that case. And what that did, that desegregated all of our public schools, from your elementary, high school, right up into college. And it was that Supreme Court decision, of course, that was resisted in much of the South and to a certain point up in the North, where President Eisenhower had to call out federal troops to enforce that decision in Little Rock, Arkansas. Governor Orville Forbes opposed it, and he activated the National Guard to keep African-American children from going to school. Well, President Eisenhower federalized them and sent in, I think it was a paratroop division that he sent into Little Rock to help enforce that Supreme Court decision. And you know, how foolish these segregationists must have looked when what they're escorting into school are little kids 7, 8, 9 years old to break the color barrier. And you know the old saying that they had in the South, you know, separate but equal. Well, they were separate, but anything but equal. But Brown versus the Board of Education, that desegregated all of our public schools from kindergarten right up through college. And of course, as you know, there was resistance to it. The University of Alabama, Governor George Wallace standing in the doorway. And Assistant Attorney General at that time, Nelson Katzenbach, ordering him to get out of the way and allow African-American students to enter the University of Alabama. Well, he activated the Alabama National Guard, and President Kennedy federalized it. So the troops that Wallace had called out to aid him had to turn around and remove them and end segregation at the University of Alabama. And I wonder how many students that go there now remember that confrontation. Well, we go back to Thurgood Marshall. He was the first African-American appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court. And he was one of our great jurors. He was appointed by President Lyndon Johnson. Through the efforts of many of our civil rights leaders, such as Thurgood Marshall and Martin Luther King Jr. and John Lewis, and a number of others, in 1965, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act, which meant that many of the barriers that had been put up by Jim Crow in the South, barring blacks from voting, were null and void and were removed. And even today, even though we say, well, Jim Crow's not there anymore, you know, look at your southern universities, the number of African Americans that say are attending the University of Mississippi, which is one of the most segregated schools in the nation. In fact, it's just within the past few weeks that the Mississippi state flag is going to change so they get rid of the stars and bars, which they had up in the corner in place of the blue field and the stars that we have in the American flag. For years, the state of Mississippi their state flag was actually that little section of the Stars and Bars, the flag of the Confederacy. So we look back at some of these early leaders and you know, the tremendous job that they did, and they took an awful lot of punishment. But all through this punishment, they talked about peace, bringing the nation together as one, where there weren't any divisions by color, by race, by religion, bringing the country together. And John Lewis, one of those advocates, he started being active in the civil rights movement when he was 18 years old. And he was a disciple of Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. King, of course, who was the great champion of civil rights. And today, the nation, very, very rightfully, honors another champion. And John Lewis, he Lion State in Alabama. You got to wonder how many of the old redneck Confederates are turning over in their graves on that. Now he's arrived in Washington, and he's going to Lion State at the Capitol. But because the Capitol is closed due to this pandemic, his coffin is going to be at the top of the stairs on the east side of the Capitol. And people can pay their respects, and I imagine thousands will, by following past that coffin at the bottom of the stairs. And of course, when later on tonight, that coffin will be taken inside for its own protection, funeral tomorrow, and then the trip down to Atlanta, Georgia, Ebenezer Baptist Church, where final rites for John Lewis will be celebrated. John Lewis was originally from Troy, Alabama. And he's had a very, very, very remarkable career. He has suffered much. He's also given much. In many, many ways, you almost compare him to Mahatma Gandhi in India. Peaceful demonstration and very, very effective at moving this civil rights movement forward. You know, as I look back, you can see a chain of events. If there had been no Thurgood Marshall winning Brown versus the Board of Education and going on the Supreme Court, pushing for the Voter Rights Act, which became law in 1965. There had been no Martin Luther King Jr. and his advocacy of a peaceful demonstrations in support of civil rights. There had been no John Lewis. There would have been no Barack Obama. There would have been no Kamala Harris. Well, we know Barack Obama, 44th President of the United States, first African American to hold that post. And hopefully, Joe Biden will pick Kamala Harris from California to be his running mate. I've been advocating this for weeks. He picks her as his running mate. He's got the election wrapped up. Senator Harris is a junior senator from the state of California, served as Attorney General out there for 13 years. And she's a very, very aggressive woman. I think she would be a tremendous vice president. There's Joe Biden at 77. He makes 4 years to be 81. And I can tell you from experience, when you hit into your 80s, you're not as agile as you were back in your 60s and your 70s. And I think Joe will be a one-term president. But Joe Biden's job is going to be to reunite the country, to bring us back together, to do away with these divisions that have been created under the present administration. In other words, he's going to have the role similar to what Jerry Ford had when he took over for Nixon. Jerry Ford took over the presidency. The office of the presidency was in disgrace. Jerry Ford brought it back to where it should be. the greatest political office in the world. Brought back respect to the office of the presidency that Nixon had destroyed. Joe Biden's going to have to do the same thing. Bring back respect to the office of the presidency that the current incumbent is destroying and has destroyed. Restore us to leadership, positions of leadership in the world. Joe Biden knows how to work across the aisle. There are a number of Republicans in the Senate that should go. One of them is Mitch McConnell, the majority leader. The man has done more harm to the country. He is probably the main one that is responsible for Congress being so dysfunctional. For example, the House of Representatives renewed a bill which would keep people on unemployment getting that extra $600 on top of their unemployment check. Mitch McConnell, the majority leader of the Senate, has shut off debate on this bill. And right now, you have to wonder how many people are being evicted from their apartments because they can't afford to pay the rent. Now the federal law banning eviction for non-payment of rent has expired. And where's Congress? They're on their August vacation. Should be in Washington, taking care of the needs of the people of this country. But they're out, excuse me, out campaigning, I would imagine, having a great time. They're virtually saying what the Republican leadership is saying, you know, to hell with the average man. So they get booted out in the street. So they haven't got sufficient income to take care of their kids, put food on the table. They don't care. They're going to enjoy their vacation. Shameful. Very, very, very shameful. Which is why, folks, you've got to vote. You've got to vote. And we've got to turn this country around. Well, as they say with Joe Biden, right now the latest polls show him with a 55 to 39% lead over the incumbent. He'll be the unifier. And I think he's going to bring back a lot of the programs that Franklin Roosevelt had back in the 30s, putting people back to work, where the federal government will become the employer of last resort. People need jobs. And we are going to go into one heck of a deep, deep depression. Probably the worst we've seen, probably even worse, more worse than what we had back in 1929, 1930, when the stock market crashed. You see the stock market now, you know, when you watch it on TV, it's up and down, up and down. And even when it goes up, its highs are nowhere near what they should be. And then you see it back down again. Well, let's talk about Kamala Harris. She becomes the vice president. I think she'll be a very good vice president. I think she'll be very loyal to President Biden. And she will learn the ins and outs of federal administration. So come 2024, when Joe Biden steps down, she'll be the logical choice to be the Democratic candidate for president, and I think she's going to win it. And I think she's the kind of person, the kind of personality. She has a very, very aggressive personality. I think she'll move the country ahead and get us straightened out and get us back on track and get us into a position of world leadership again. I think Biden will lay the groundwork. I think Harris will build on that and take us into that position of leadership. I have an awful lot of confidence in her. I'm also very, very thankful that I'm not her husband. I feel sorry for that fella. He probably doesn't get much of a word in edgewise, or if he does, it's to say please and thank you. But she's the kind of person we need in leadership. Now, 100 years ago, 1920, for the first time, women got the right to vote. They got the right to hold property. And all of a sudden we woke up and said, my golly, they're women with a lot of talent. They can take over and they can lead us. Look around at the number of women that are in Congress, the number of women that are mayors, the number of women that are chiefs of police. Now, years ago, if you said a woman was going to be the chief of police, man, they would have laughed you out of town. Well, right now, of course, the city of Burlington has an interim chief. She was formerly the police chief in Colchester, and she retired. And she's come out of retirement to serve as the interim chief of the city of Burlington. Atlanta. The chief of police in Atlanta is a woman. And a number of other cities. Los Angeles, the police chief is a woman. So we're suddenly waking up and say, women have talent. And it's something that the country kept the lid on for a number of years. Well, as a nation, of course, we were founded on high ideals. And we're still trying to reach those ideals. You know, we look at our Declaration of Independence, especially the second paragraph. It says that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with the inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we're a long way from living up to that. But we're getting closer, closer, closer. It just seems like it takes forever. It takes a lifetime, and indeed it does. It takes many, many, many lifetimes before we finally reach our goal. You know, we had the Great Civil War. The war was fought over two things, states' rights and the issue of slavery. Something in the South, they call that special institution. And it took a civil war and thousands of young men giving their lives for slavery to come to an end officially. And it came to an end with the 13th Amendment, which Abraham Lincoln pushed. He was assassinated before it was passed. But the 13th Amendment, of course, ended slavery. The 15th Amendment, which was signed into law by President Grant, granted every man the right to vote. And this was something that the women's suffrage movement opposed. And you look and say, well, why would they oppose an amendment that gives everybody the right to vote? Well, because it gave every male the right to vote, but not every female. And the 19th Amendment would take the 19th Amendment to give women the right to vote and to hold property. You know, you talk to some of your high school kids today and talk about how things were back in colonial times and right up through, say, to 1920. And they find it very, very hard to believe that women were actually property. They were the property of the father, who's the head of the house, and on his death, they became the property of the oldest male. Well, that's where you have the term, you know, you've heard the term old maid and spinster and stuff like that for women that are single. And that's where it came from. Because after the father died, say, and the oldest brother, say, became the head of the household, well, his sisters became his property. And if he couldn't marry his sisters off, and one was still hanging around the house, and the brother got married, well, the single sister sort of, you might say she was a fifth wheel, but she had to do chores like assisting the wife. She was second to the wife. You had the brother who owned her, his wife, and her parents had to shell out a, well, I don't know if you call it an endowment or not, but in the old days when women got married, the bride's family had to pay the groom's family a certain amount of money. And we still have the custom today where when a woman marries, she takes her husband's name. For a while, there was a movement on where names were hyphenated. She kept her maiden name and added her husband's name. But for the most part, when women marry, they take their husband's name. Instead of being Miss Smith, they become Mrs. Jones, so forth, as you all know. And in the marital vow, that a lot of women don't care for, in some places they've abandoned it. You know, the man takes the vow to love, honor, and cherish. Where the woman takes the vow to love, honor, cherish, and obey. And I think pretty much that part has been dropped. Even after the Civil War, and when the Union troops marched into Texas, and the Union General declared that slavery was over, and you know, we celebrate that day on Juneteenth, which is New Day, or new expression now, the official end of slavery, done by the military. And incidentally, when all this action is underway, you know, to defund your police and all that, slavery came to an end because of the sacrifices made by white men in blue uniforms. It was back in the Civil War, African troops, the only part that a lot of them could play were servants to the white officers. But there were, during the course of the war, a number of African-American regiments created, including the 54th in Massachusetts, that many of the African-American population in Vermont joined that regiment. And they fought very gallantly and very brilliantly. They took a lot of casualties. But this is what it would take to end slavery. And then, under President Hayes, when he ended Union occupation of the South, what did we have? We had former Confederate generals. One of them was Braxton Bragg, and Nathan Forrest, another Confederate general, organized the Ku Klux Klan, try and terrify the black population, keep them away from the polls. You had these Jim Crow laws. You had lynchings throughout the South. And not only African Americans were lynched, but also Jewish merchants. In Georgia, there was a whole slew of Jewish merchants that were lynched. And lynching for a while, well, it was sort of one of the scourges of the land. Illegal, but very few people in the South that did it were ever persecuted for it. The same way with the Civil Rights Movement back in the 60s. How many Southerners paid the penalty for the murders that they committed? The killing of the 3 Freedom Riders in Mississippi. The murder of Emmett Till. Finally, one person was tried a few years ago, but he was so old there wasn't any point putting him in jail. They got away with murder and never paid the price. It would go right up into the 50s, actually the late 40s, when Harry Truman desegregated the military forces. Before that time, an African American could not be an officer. When Harry Truman desegregated the military services, that block was removed. And you've had some African Americans that have given tremendous service to the country. One that comes to mind is Colin Powell. Colin Powell, one of our great military leaders, served as Secretary of State for a short time for George Bush. And then when he realized he had been made a front man and a puppet for supporting the Iraq War, he resigned. So it all adds up as the civil rights movement moves on and on. It's getting better and better and better. The incident in Milwaukee or not in Milwaukee, but in Minneapolis, and the demonstrations that took place throughout the country. The vast majority are peaceful. In Portland, Oregon, there's that ongoing conflict. And the flames have been fired there by the arrival of unannounced federal officers. No insignia on their uniform. They don't know who they are, or what organization they're working for. They're out just gassing people and hauling them off the street and everything else. Sometimes if you let a demonstration run its course and they make their point, things will be better. It's a lot better than armed confrontation. Armed confrontation is like a war. It accomplishes nothing. It only makes the situation that much worse. And we're seeing that out in Portland, Oregon. And now the idiot in the White House wants to send more troops into Chicago. I think Albuquerque, New Mexico is another place he's targeted, plus a couple of other cities. Well, we know he's stupid, and he's getting some awful stupid advice. You don't need to put down anything with heavy, heavy military force. It doesn't work, and it never will work. And the average citizens of the United States will not be cowed. And we're seeing that example in Portland, where they're holding up and they're saying, we don't need you folks. Go on back where you came from. We'll settle this. This will be handled. This will work out, and it will. It will. Well, again, we come back to the man we're honoring today, and that's Congressman Lewis. I think if you look at his life, the 34 years he served in Congress, and you look back at a very, very young man, 18 years old, when he first got involved in the civil rights movement. I bet in those days, in his wildest imagination, he ever thought he would have the tribute at his death that he is having now. He's being recognized as one of our great national leaders, one of our great champions of human rights. And as I say today, he will lie at the top of the stairs, or his remains will lie at the top of the stairs of the east side of the nation's capital. Well, in the past few years, you know, we've lost a number of our great leaders. John McCain. If there ever was a man that was a champion of justice, a champion of fair play, it was John McCain. Man who served in Vietnam, was shot down, spent 5 years as a POW, went through a living hell. Came back to the United States to be badmouthed by the ninny in the White House. And he was given a national send-off, which we should have been, because John McCain was and is a great American hero. And Elijah Cummings, a congressman from Maryland, who just, I believe, about 2 months ago, died and was honored. Another great civil rights leader. So gradually, we're working our way there. Slow but sure. Will we ever have a perfect setup? Well, not in my lifetime. Probably not in yours. But we're a lot closer now than we were when I was first born. I was born in 1933. And there's been a lot of history and a lot of water under the bridge. As I look back my 87 years, I've lived through a very, very, very historic time. Not only here in the United States, but throughout the world. The whole concept of world order has changed. And in the long run, it's changing for the better. Well, with that, we're coming to the end of another program. May Almighty God in His infinite wisdom continue to bless these United States of America. God love you. Have a great week, and we'll see you all next week.